March 3, 1991. A dark stretch of freeway in Los Angeles. A man, recently paroled, speeds down the 210 in a white Hyundai. 3 friends in the car. Police lights flash behind them. A pursuit begins, speeds hitting over 100 miles per hour. Helicopters hover. The man, Rodney King, is just 25 years old. When he finally pulls over, the police approach. And then history is made. Not because of what happened, but because it was filmed. Today, we begin a 2-part series on one of the most explosive cases of the 20th century. In this episode, we look at the night Rodney King was beaten by Los Angeles police officers. The video shocked the world. But the story behind it, and what followed, reveals a deeper rot in the foundations of American law enforcement, race, and justice. The intelligence is artificial, but the crime is real. This is AI true crime, beaten on camera, the Rodney King assault. Part 1. Who is Rodney King? Rodney King was born on April 2, 1965, in Sacramento, California. He was one of 5 children born to Ronald and Odessa King. His father worked in a local milk bottling plant and struggled with alcoholism, which would have a lasting impact on Rodney's understanding of addiction and family hardship. Despite the challenges, King remembered his childhood as relatively normal, though he would later reflect on how instability and discrimination were undercurrents he didn't fully understand until he grew older. Rodney grew up in Altadena, a diverse but economically constrained neighborhood northeast of Los Angeles. He attended John Muir High School but did not graduate. Like many young men from working-class black communities in the 1970s and 1980s, King found himself adrift. With few job prospects and little guidance, he turned to low-level criminal activity, which led to minor brushes with the law. In 1989, he was convicted of second-degree robbery after assaulting a convenience store owner and stealing $200. He served 1 year in prison and was released on parole in 1990. By 1991, King was trying, by his own account, to get his life back on track. He was working sporadically as a construction worker and a pool cleaner, doing what he could to support his family. He had 2 daughters and was living with his mother, Odessa. Friends described him as gentle and soft-spoken, a man who was often quiet in groups but liked to joke and laugh when he was comfortable. Importantly, King was not a political activist. He had no affiliations with civil rights organizations, no public persona, and no desire to be a spokesperson. He was not trying to become a symbol of anything. What happened to him wasn't sought or invited. It was, in every sense, a product of circumstance, systemic aggression, and a single decision made on a warm March night. That decision? Getting behind the wheel after drinking. On the night of March 2, 1991, King and 2 of his friends, Freddie Helms and Bryant Allen, had been drinking at a friend's apartment in Los Angeles. King later admitted he had consumed alcohol and smoked marijuana. At the time, he was still on parole from his 1989 robbery conviction. Driving under the influence could violate his parole and potentially send him back to prison. Around 12:30 a.m. on March 3, the 3 men climbed into King's white 1987 Hyundai Excel. King was behind the wheel. What he didn't know was that just minutes later, a routine traffic stop would spiral into a national crisis and change the course of American history. Part 2. The Pursuit. Just after midnight on March 3, 1991, California Highway Patrol officers Tim and Melanie Singer observed a white Hyundai Excel speeding along the 210 freeway in the San Fernando Valley. When the officers attempted to initiate a routine traffic stop, the vehicle did not slow down. Instead, it accelerated. Rodney King, behind the wheel, later said he panicked. He was on parole and had been drinking. A DUI arrest might mean a return to prison. In that moment, he made a decision that would change not just his life, but the nation's trajectory. The pursuit began modestly but escalated rapidly. As King weaved through traffic at speeds reaching 110 miles per hour, more patrol cars joined the chase. The Hyundai exited the freeway, cutting through residential streets, then rejoined the freeway again. It was erratic, desperate, dangerous. The pursuit lasted around 8 miles and involved both California Highway Patrol and Los Angeles Police Department units. A police helicopter joined overhead, tracking the car's every move. Police radio chatter spiked with urgency. By the time King finally exited the freeway for good and came to a stop on Foothill Boulevard in Lakeview Terrace, the scene had drawn over a dozen officers. Lakeview Terrace was quiet that night, but that changed quickly. As sirens wailed and helicopter blades whirred overhead, neighbors were roused from sleep. Among them was George Holliday, a 31-year-old plumber who lived across the street from where King had stopped. He heard the commotion and stepped out onto his balcony. Then he grabbed his Sony Handycam and hit record. At this point, CHP officers Tim and Melanie Singer approached the vehicle. King's two passengers, Freddie Helms and Bryant Allen, complied immediately with officers' commands. They were pulled from the vehicle, handcuffed, and placed into patrol cars without incident. According to their testimony, both men were scared and confused. They urged King to get out of the car and do the same. But King hesitated. Eventually, he stepped out of the vehicle, but did so in an unusual manner. Witnesses said he appeared to wave at the police helicopter overhead. Some officers described his behavior as taunting or bizarre. King later said he was trying to remain calm, trying to show he wasn't a threat. What followed would be interpreted in drastically different ways. Officers claimed King initially resisted arrest. He allegedly grabbed his buttocks and wiggled, a gesture they claimed was meant to provoke. According to Sergeant Stacey Koon, the scene supervisor, King resisted verbal commands and postured in a threatening way. Officers deployed a taser. Twice. Both darts struck King's chest. But he remained standing. What happened next was not a takedown. It was a beating, and it was all caught on tape. Officer Lawrence Powell stepped forward, baton drawn. What George Holliday's camcorder captured was terrifying. King was struck with the baton again and again, across the back, the legs, the arms. As he crumpled to the ground, the blows continued. He tried to crawl. Officers circled him, striking in unison. At one point, Powell struck King in the face. Briceño kicked him in the torso. Officer Wynn joined in, adding baton blows. Sergeant Koon stood nearby, issuing commands, but never intervening. The assault lasted over a minute and a half. In total, King was struck at least 33 times with batons and kicked 6 times. The audio captured officers shouting to hit his joints and stay back. King lay bleeding on the ground. His skull fractured. His cheekbone broken. He had permanent nerve damage. His ankle was shattered. When paramedics arrived, King was moaning but alive. He was placed into an ambulance and taken to Pacifica Hospital. Officers posed for pictures. George Holliday turned off his camcorder. The next day, he watched the footage and felt sick. He brought the tape to the LAPD. No one responded, so he took it to KTLA Channel 5. What the station aired would explode across America. Quote, "I saw something that shocked me. I thought if I don't do something with this tape, this could just get buried." George Holliday. By the evening of March 4, 1991, the Rodney King tape was on every major network. Cable news picked it up. Local affiliates rebroadcast it on a loop. For many white Americans, it was the first time they had seen what many black and brown Angelenos had long experienced. For black Los Angeles, it was confirmation. For the LAPD, it was damage control. And for Rodney King, it was just the beginning. Part 4. Public outrage. The footage of Rodney King's beating aired publicly on March 4, 1991, less than 24 hours after the incident. It was broadcast first by KTLA, the local Los Angeles television station that received the tape from George Holliday. From there, it spread like wildfire across the country and the globe. Before long, the images were ubiquitous. King on the ground, surrounded, helpless, while officers struck him again and again. The American public had seen violence on television before. They had seen riots and protests, foreign wars and urban crime. But this was something different. This was raw, uncut, undeniable. And perhaps most crucially, it was not filmed by a journalist, a police officer, or a government agency. It was filmed by a citizen by chance from a balcony across the street. The response was immediate and visceral. Calls began flooding into LAPD headquarters. Civil rights groups held emergency press conferences. Local news reporters chased down city officials, demanding accountability. The footage aired repeatedly on CNN, NBC, ABC, and CBS. Nightly news anchors struggled to describe what they were seeing. Quote, "We all watched the same tape, and what we saw was not law enforcement. It was a public lynching." Rev. Jesse Jackson. In South Los Angeles, long plagued by racial profiling, police violence, and institutional neglect, the video confirmed what generations of black Angelenos already knew. Justice was not blind. It was selective. It turned its gaze away from those in uniform. The NAACP, Urban League, ACLU, and countless grassroots organizations demanded immediate charges and suspensions. Marches were organized. Press releases denounced LAPD's code of silence. Community leaders began speaking not just about the King case, but about a pattern of abuse, about Eula Love, about the chokehold deaths in the 1980s, about gang unit crackdowns that blurred the line between enforcement and terrorism. Even the federal government took notice. President George H.W. Bush addressed the nation just days after the video's release. In a rare rebuke of local law enforcement, he said, quote, "What I saw made me sick. It was revolting. I don't care what the circumstances. Those officers should be brought to justice." President George H.W. Bush. Police Chief Daryl Gates, already a controversial figure due to his aggressive policing philosophy, promised a full internal investigation. But to many, this promise rang hollow. Gates had long supported the use of military-style tactics in urban neighborhoods, and his leadership had overseen countless incidents of excessive force. Behind closed doors, the LAPD scrambled. Public information officers were overwhelmed. Department memos circulated urging officers to avoid public statements. Mayor Tom Bradley, himself a former LAPD officer and the city's first black mayor, called the footage horrifying and pressured Gates to act decisively. On March 6, just 3 days after the beating, the 4 primary officers involved, Sergeant Stacey Koon, Officer Lawrence Powell, Officer Timothy Wind, and Officer Theodore Briceño, were placed on administrative leave. 2 weeks later, on March 15th, they were indicted by a Los Angeles County grand jury on charges of assault with a deadly weapon and excessive use of force. This move was historic. Rarely were officers indicted for excessive force, let alone multiple officers in a high-profile case. For many, it was a sign of hope. Justice might actually be served. But beneath that hope lay suspicion. The legal system, they knew, had protected police officers before. Tensions simmered. Protests continued. Local talk radio and community meetings became hotbeds of debate. Was this finally a turning point, or just another false dawn? Nationally, the Rodney King case became shorthand for a deeper American disease. It was discussed on Oprah, on 60 Minutes, on the floor of Congress. Editorials were written about policing, racism, the militarization of law enforcement, and the role of video in exposing injustice. Some conservative voices argued that the tape didn't show the full story, that King was resisting, that force was necessary. But those arguments were quickly drowned out by the simple, brutal clarity of the images. Quote, "You didn't need to know what happened before or after. You saw it. That was enough." Angela Davis. Meanwhile, Rodney King was recovering. He had been released from the hospital after several days, but continued to suffer from physical and emotional trauma. Reporters followed him everywhere. Tabloids ran misleading stories about his criminal past. King retreated into privacy, rarely speaking to the press. When he did, it was brief, confused, often overwhelmed by emotion. Quote, "I'm just trying to heal. I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to be on TV. I didn't want any of this." Rodney King, early press comment. But the die was cast. He was no longer just a man. He had become a symbol of brutality, of survival, of a system at war with the people it claimed to protect. What came next would test not only Rodney King, but the very soul of the city of Los Angeles. This has been AI True Crime. Join us in the next episode as we look at the chaos, the fury, and the reckoning that followed. The Los Angeles riots of 1992, ignited by the verdict and seared into American memory.